Seventh, as we are not for rising in arms for trifles of our own things, or small injuries done to ourselves, but in a case of necessity for the preservation of our lives, religion, laws, and liberties, when all that are dear to us as men and as Christians are in hazard. So we are not for rising up in arms to force the magistrates to be of our religion, but to defend our religion against his force. We do not think it the way that Christ hath appointed to propagate religion by arms. Let persecutors and limbs of Antichrist take that to them. But we think it a privilege which Christ hath allowed us to defend and preserve our religion by arms, especially when it hath been established by the laws of the land, and become a law right, and the dearest and most precious right and interest we have to contend for. It is true, saith Christ in John 18, verse 36, quote, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews, unquote. But this objection will not conclude that Christ's kingdom is not to be defended and preserved by resistance of all that would impiously and sacrilegiously spoil us of it in this world, because it is not of this world. For then all were obliged to suffer it to be run down by slaves of hell and Satan and Antichrist vassals, papists and malignants. Yea, magistrates were not to fight for it, for they are among his servants, if they be Christians. But the good confession he witnesses here before Pilate is that he hath a kingdom, which, as it is not in opposition to any Caesarean majesty, so it must not be usurped upon by any king of clay, but is specially distinct from all the kingdoms of the world, and subordinate to no earthly power, being of a spiritual nature. Whereof this is a demonstration and sufficient security for earthly kingdoms, that his servants as such, that is, as Christians and as ministers, were not appointed by him to propagate it by arms, nor to deliver him their king at that time, because he would not suffer his glorious design of redemption to be any longer retarded. But this doth not say, but though they are not to propagate it as Christians and as ministers by carnal weapons, yet they may preserve it with such weapons as men. Hence that old saying may be vindicated, Prayers and tears are the arms of the church. I grant they are so, the only best prevailing arms, and without which all others would be ineffectual, and that they, together with preaching and church discipline, etc., are the only ecclesiastical or spiritual arms of a church as a church. But the members thereof are also men, and as men they may use the same weapons that others do. And ye, my flock, the flock of my pasture, are men, saith the Lord. Ezekiel 33, verse 31. Yea, from this I shall take an argument. If it be lawful for private subjects, without the concurrence of parliaments, to resist a tyrant by prayers and tears, then it is lawful also to resist him by violence. But the former is true, as our adversaries grant by this objection, and I have proved it to be a duty to pray against tyrants, head 2. Ergo, the connection is founded upon these reasons. Number 1, this personal resistance by violence is as consistent with that command in Romans 13, verses 1 and 2, quote, Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, unquote. As resistance by prayer is with that. 1 Timothy 2, verses 1 and 2. I exhort that supplications be made for kings, and for all that are in authority. If the prince be good, the one is as lawful as the other, and a sinful resistance of the ordinance of God, to pray against him, no less than the other, to fight against him. Therefore, when he becomes a tyrant and destroyer of the Lord's inheritance, and an apostate, as I may not pray for him except conditionally, but against him as an enemy of Christ, so I may also fight against him as such. Number 2, as adversaries themselves will grant that resistance by prayers and tears is more powerful and effectual than the other, so the laws of the land make the one treasonable, as well as the other, and that deservedly when the prince is doing his duty. But when he turneth tyrant, neither can justly be condemned. These things being permitted, I shall come shortly to the purpose, and endeavor to prove this truth, that it is a necessary duty for a community, whether they have the concurrence of the primores, nobles, and representatives or not, to endeavor, in the defense of their religion, lives, laws, and liberties, to resist and repress the usurpation and tyranny of prevailing dominators, using and abusing their power for subverting religion, invading the liberties, and overturning the fundamental laws of the country. Wherein I shall be but short, because this truth is sufficiently confirmed by all the arguments of the second head. Yet I may only hint at many others, and prosecute them in this order. First, I shall produce some arguments from the law of nature and nations. Secondly, from the common practice of all Christian people. And thirdly, from express scriptures. First, the argument of the first class are very multifarious. I shall reduce them to a few, as compendiously as may be, and only give the strength of them as a syllogistical form, without expatiating, save where the matter requires. Number 1. The great antagonists of this truth, through the clearness thereof, are forced to assert and grant such particulars as will by consequence justify this plea. Number 1. Barclay contra monarchum is cited by the apologetic relation and just populi, asserting, quote, that if a king will alienate and subject his kingdom without his subjects' consent, or be carried with a hostile mind to the destruction of his people, his kingdom is actually lost, and the people may not only lawfully resist, but also depose him, unquote. Grotius de jure belli, lib 1, cap 4, asserts the same, and adds, quote, if he but attempt to do so, he may be resisted, unquote. The Surveyor of Naphtali grants the same, pages 23 and 24. Yea, this hath been granted in open court by the Council of Scotland, that in case of the king's alienating his kingdoms, he may be resisted. Hence, firstly, if vendition or alienation of kingdoms, or attempts of it, do annul a king's authority, then in alienation of them from Christ, to whom they are devoted by covenant, and selling to Antichrist, as is attempted by this king, gives the people a right to resist him. But the former is here conceded. Ergo, secondly, we need say no more to apply the other, that carrying a hostile mind to the destruction of the people does forfeit his kingdom, and gives the people right to resist, than that a papist is always known to carry a hostile mind to the destruction of Protestants, and all the designs declared these 27 years have been demonstrative efforts of it. Number 2, Dr. Fern acknowledgeth, quote, that personal defense is lawful against the sudden, illegal, and inevitable assaults of the king's messengers, or of himself, insofar as to ward off his blows, or hold his hands, as also he alloweth private persons liberty to deny subsidies and tribute to the prince, when he employeth it to the destruction of the commonwealth, unquote. Hence, firstly, if one may defend himself against the sudden, illegal, and inevitable assaults of the king or his messengers, then may many men, in defense of their lives and liberties, defend themselves against the surprising massacres, the sudden assaults, and much more, the devised and deliberate assaults of the tyrant's bloody emissaries, which are illegal and inevitable, as all their furious and bloody onsets have been. But the former is here allowed. Therefore, thirdly, Bodine de Repub, lib 2, cap 5, granteth, quote, if a king turn tyrant, he may lawfully, at his subjects' request, be invaded, resisted, condemned, or slain by a foreign prince, unquote. Hence, if foreign princes may lawfully help a people oppressed by their own sovereign, then people may resist themselves, if they be able, and hold in their pains. But the former is here granted. Therefore, the consequence cannot be denied, for foreigners have no more power or authority over another sovereign than the people have themselves. Fourth, Arnesius, de author principle, granteth, quote, that if the prince proceed extrajudicially, without order of law, by violence, every private man hath power to resist, unquote. So the Surveyor of Naphtali, as above, quote, grants so much of a woman's violent resisting attempts against the honor of her chastity, and tending to ensnare her in sin, whereof her non-resistance makes her guilty, unquote. Hence, number 1, if every extrajudicial violence of a prince may be resisted, then also all contrajudicial violence against law or reason must be opposed, for that is more grievous than all their violences, wherein they do not act as judges, must be resisted. And that is altogether, for in none of them they can act as judges. But the former is here granted. Therefore, number 2, if a woman may defend her chastity against the king, lest her non-resistance make her guilty, oh, if all women had been of this mind, the country would not have been pestered so with the king's bastards. Then may a nation, or any part of it, resist a tyrant's attempt upon the honor of their religion, enticing them to fornication with the mother of harlots, lest their non-resistance make them guilty. But the former is here yielded. Therefore, fifth, that same Arnesius, cap 4, saith, quote, Of the former, to wit, he who is called a tyrant in title, it is determined by all without any difficulty that he may be lawfully repulsed, or, if by force he be gotten into the throne, he may warrantably be thence removed, because he hath not any jot of power which is not illegitimate, and unto which resistance is forbidden for the fear of God and for conscience sake, and therefore he is no further to be looked at than as an enemy." Unquote. This is so patent pertinent to the present professor of the government that no words can more particularly apply it. 6. Grotius de jure belli, lib 1, cap 4, granteth the law of not resisting, does not bind when the danger is most weighty and certain, quote, and we do not plead for it in any other case, unquote. And further he says, quote, "The law of non-resistance seemeth to have flowed from them, who first combined together into society, and from whom such as did command did derive their power. Now, if it had been asked of such, whether they should choose to die, rather than in any case to resist the superior by arms, I know not if they would have yielded thereto, unless with this addition, if they could not be resisted but with the greatest perturbation of the commonwealth, and destruction of many innocents." And afterwards he hath these words, "Nevertheless I scarce dare condemn every one, or the lesser part, which may only be done at utmost extremity, notwithstanding, respect is to be had to the common good." Unquote. For which we need make no inference. The concession is so large that it answers our case. 7. The surveyor of Naphtali, in the place above cited, quote, grants legal self-defense against the sovereign by way of plea in court for safety of a man's person or estate, as also is the case of most habited, notor, and complete tyranny against the law, to the destruction of the body of a people, and of all known legal liberties, and the being of religion according to law, and in case of his not being in his natural and right wits, unquote. Hence, number 1, if it be lawful to resist the king by a plea in law for an estate, yea, the law will allow by actual force if he come to take possession of it illegally, then it must be lawful for their lives and estates, liberties and religion, to resist him by force when the legal resistance is not admitted, but the former is yielded here. Therefore, the reason of the connection is the municipal law permits the one, and the law of nature and nations, which no municipal law can infringe, will warrant the other. He hath no more right to be both judge and party in this case more than in the other, and he can no more act as a sovereign in this case than in the other. 2nd, if it be lawful to resist habited, notor, and complete tyranny against law, to the destruction of the body of a people, and of all known legal liberties, and the being of religion according to law, then we desire no more to conclude the duty of resisting this tyranny exercised this 27 years habitually, which the desolation of many hundred families, the banishment of many hundreds to slavery, the rivers of blood, etc., have made notor to all Scotland at least, and the perversion of all the fundamental laws, and all civil and religious liberties, yea, the subversion of every remaining model of our religion, as reformed and covenanted to be preserved in doctrine, worship, discipline, and government, and designs to introduce popery and establish arbitrary government, have made complete. But the former is here granted. Therefore, 3rd, if, in the case of his being out of his wits, he should run upon an innocent man to kill him, or attempt to cut his own throat, it were then lawful to resist him, yea, a sin not to do it. Then, when in a rage, or deliberately, he is seeking to destroy many hundreds of the people of God, he may be resisted. But the former is clear. Therefore, 4th, King James VI, in his remonstrance for the right of kings against the oration of Cardinal Perrin, hath these words, "The public laws make it lawful and free for any private person to enterprise against any usurper of the kingdom. Then shall it not be duty to enterprise against a man, who by the laws of the land is not capable of a right to reign, who hath got into the throne by the means of murder, and can pretend no right but that of succession, which I prove to be none in head 2. However, we see by these concessions of adversaries that the absolute subjection they talk of will not hold, nor the prerogative be so uncontrollable in every case as they would pretend, and that in many cases the safety of the people hath the supremacy above it, and that also in these cases the people must be judges whether they may resist or not."